As leaders, we often have to have conversations maybe that we'd rather not have. Difficult conversations for one reason or another. Maybe we don't feel confident. Maybe there's bad news. The good news today is that joining me on the podcast, the Happier at Work podcast, the career and culture podcast for people first leaders, is Sarah Rozenthuler. And we talk all things difficult conversations, how to have them, how to strategize, how to maintain relationships while having those difficult conversations. I'm your host, Aoife O'Brien. I'm the career and culture strategist for commercial leaders and teams. And I would love to know what you think and what's one thing you're going to do differently after listening to today's podcast episode. Get involved in the conversation over on LinkedIn or feel free to reach out to me directly. Sarah, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. Do you want to let me know and let listeners know a little bit about your background and what brought you on the journey to where you are today?
Sure. What a great big open question to start with. So I might say a few words about me professionally and then about me more personally as well, as
Of
to give
course.
listeners a sort of rounded out view. So professionally, I'm a psychologist by background, did a psychology degree, specialised in organisational psychology, and really went for, I just felt attracted to working in organisations. And I was taught psychology quite scientifically. So asking what's the evidence and so on. So I can be a bit geeky about psychology sometimes, and I like to go and read the evidence base and so on. And then I followed that thread. Well, I had a few twists and turns along the way, including some years as a street circus performer. We could always link back to that. But I then, certainly from my late 20s, after graduating, after living in Spain for a few years, really followed the thread of becoming a chartered psychologist, working in large organizations, and then going into consulting work that has really crystallized into leadership development work with a particular emphasis on authentic leadership, how to strengthen communication, how to find work that's really fulfilling and purposeful for you. So that's a sense of the professional. And on a more personal level, I was born into a family. So I'm one of four siblings. I'm second out of four. So I identify quite a lot as a middle child. And they often apparently make, or I was going to say, make good facilitators, mediators, or step into that role, because you're used to dealing with not only parents, but, big sister in my case, younger brother and sister, lots of love in the family. I think I was very fortunate, but also there were bubbling away under the surface some tensions, and once in a while a grown up would sort of get quite angry, not very often, but because the rest of the time things were quite easygoing and harmonious, I felt quite shaken by all of that as a child. And this is relevant, I think, to the topic we're going to come on and talk about, because I think I've had a curiosity going right back to my very young years about how people can talk and interact together and really say the things that need to be said without rupturing or going into really quite difficult places because things haven't been talked about. And I can really trace that back to my very early days. So that's a sense of me.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Sarah. And I think we'll come back to that very particular thing in a second. But I would love to come back to this idea first of fulfillment at work. And I love that you're so evidence-based. You're like, show me the evidence. Where's the proof of this? What was the hypothesis? What are we actually trying to find out here? What are we trying to prove? What have you seen that really drives people's sense of fulfillment at work?
Oh, a number of things, I would say. But if I try and condense it into a few key points, I think Self-expression
Mm.
plays a big part. That sense of that I can bring some of my creative spark to work. I know some of my most fulfilling moments, and I see this in coachees as well and clients, is when I find myself doing something and I've got that sense of this is really me.
Mm.
It's I just feel I can be myself and I can bring my quirky bits as well as my very socially acceptable bits. And so self-expression is one part. I think fulfillment at work also comes from, let's call it stretch, but
Mm.
feeling that you're growing and learning, whatever that means to you. You're evolving in some way through what you're doing. So there's stretch. And the third thing I'm going to add, it's another S, would be significance. So a sense, and again, this is so subjective and it's so personal to an individual. But if we've got a sense that what we're doing is meaningful, making a difference, having a positive impact, it doesn't have to be a huge thing, then I think that really helps put a spring in people's steps at
Mm.
work. It certainly does with me.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love how you've summarized those three things. I love how they all begin with S, by the way, as
Oh,
well. Like, I
good.
don't know, was that intentional or is this like on the spot now? They all begin with S. But just to reflect on those, you were saying about self-expression. To me, you mentioned the word creativity, and you were saying it's like being your full self. To me, what I heard from that as well is a sense of authenticity, that I can show my kind of weird bits and all. And anyone who's been listening to the podcast for a while knows I'm a bit of a Simpsons nerd. And when I can bring that kind of humor into the workplace, I love it. And when people get my jokes, or at least they appreciate them, they maybe not, they don't relate to the episode, but they appreciate that I've made a connection somewhere.
Yes.
That's where I definitely come fully alive. You mentioned about stretch, which I've jotted down saying it's about learning and challenge. So
Yep.
that you have the opportunity in the workplace to actually learn something new. And I know certainly for me, I've been in situations where I felt I wasn't really learning and I went external to the company to do a separate program so that I felt like I was learning something, and like that was something, an internal drive that I had. And then this sense of challenge, it ties in well with my happier at work framework, where it's not just about doing your job or showing up and ticking the box. It's about feeling like you're actually challenged at work and you're learning and you're working on something that's kind of hard, that it's not too easy for you, but you have the opportunity to really, get into the meaty things, even if it's hard, and it might feel hard in the moment, but actually it's stretching you in a really positive way. And then the last one about significance, and I have spoken about that on the podcast before with one of my previous guests, Zach Mercurio. This idea of meaning and impact. We are meaning making machines. And again, being able to articulate as a leader the impact that each of the individuals contributes on your team gives them such a great sense of fulfillment at work, and like, this is how I'm contributing, this is what the work that I do means, and this is why it matters.
Yeah, it's so valuable to have that. And it's so valuable to have it in a day-to-day sense.
Mm.
And I think in one of your previous episodes as well, you made this lovely distinction about whether it's purpose with a capital P or purpose with a small p.
Yeah.
And I think you did a great job in that conversation of debunking one of the myths around person, that we have to be saving the rainforest or
Mm.
doing brain surgery in order to feel a sense of purpose at work. I think it's really possible to feel that work is meaningful and therefore energizing, even if you're working in a call center.
Mm.
Even if, if you can, as you were saying in that conversation, connect the dots between your daily role, maybe you're in accounts payable or procurement, and it's harder to draw the line. between your role and then the stated purpose of the organization or the team. But to the extent you're able to do that, that will bring a sense of fulfillment at work. And that is really, really valuable.
And that's how we connected originally, Sarah, through the Purpose Collective. You ran the Purpose Collective. I want to say it was about 5 years ago. Would that be
That would
right?
be about right. It was
Yeah.
very much during the start of the pandemic. Yes,
Yeah.
that's
So it would have
right.
been, yeah. It's a scary thought now to think that that was 5 years ago. I mean, to me, it feels like it could have been a year ago as well at the same time. But I
Yes.
love this concept. I'd love to come back now to what you had mentioned specifically in your personal life about knowing what I heard was knowing how to manage relationships, knowing what to say without rupturing that strong relationship that you have with someone. And I think it's so difficult to tread that fine line, especially in the workplace. So, how do you see the relationship between maybe what you saw there, what you've learned over time, and how to apply that then, those learnings to the relationships that we have every day with people? And whether that's having difficult conversations or check-ins, or like how does that actually show up for us? Like what are, I'll give you free rein with where to begin with this, because it's a huge question.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great question. And it is such a delicate balance, as
Mm,
you're pointing to. And one of the things that popped into my head as you were speaking there, and it's a line, it's not originally mine, but it's written in the foreword to my first book. So the first book's now called How to Have Meaningful Conversations. And Neil Donald Walsh wrote the foreword, and he's a tremendous author.
mm.
He's one of only six authors ever to have had six titles on the New York Times bestselling list.
Wow.
Anyway, he's immense, and I've studied with him, and he's been something of a mentor to me. Anyway, in the foreword, he wrote, "Speak your truth, but soothe your words with peace," as a
Ah,
way of sort of trying to capture that challenge, really, of how you stay true to you. You might be speaking out some tricky things that you might make you uncomfortable. You might have a strong sense they're going to make the other person uncomfortable. And yet you do so in a way, you do so in a tone of voice. You find words where it will soothe your words with peace, where tonally
mm.
you're doing your utmost to transmit respect for the other person, some empathy for the other person, to the extent that we're able to do that. And of course, none of us can ever really fully stand in another person's shoes. All we can do is our best at feeling into how this message might land. And the other piece, I'm just going to quickly add to this, because this is something I've really had to learn myself over the years, is a reminder that ultimately I am only responsible for the message I'm giving. I am not responsible for the other person's reaction to what I'm saying. So I really, as they sometimes say, look towards keeping my own side of the street clean. And so for a difficult conversation, I'm big on preparing for that. And I do a lot of that in my coaching work and so on. And there's that reminder, I'm not responsible for the other person ultimately. And I'm going to add one more piece, just as
Do.
a inflow here. And of course, the other thing that I've really learned is the preparation is only half the story, because as important as that, if not more so, is our presence
Mm.
and just being fully here in the moment, as I am intending to be. Hopefully I am with you right now, because as we all know, in conversations, the unexpected comes in, you get a curveball, you might have practiced saying, your line at the very heart of the conversation, and yet, you know our biggest resource isn't actually our preparation, it's being fully here and
Mm,
available
yeah.
to talk.
And dare I say, Sarah, not getting hijacked by our emotions. If we're in one of those high stakes conversations, that we can remain calm, that we're not, and I know I've certainly been on both the giving and the receiving end of those and experienced the emotional hijacking, where you kind of forget what was it that I was going to say, no matter how much preparation you did, but being able to, I don't want to say control them, but just be aware that your emotions are there, and like you say, stay present rather than kind of going off on a little bit of a, oh no, what do I do now? And now I'm totally stuck. Um,
Yes.
I'd love to know, in your experience, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to this stuff?
Oh God, well, not preparing.
Mm,
So having to then maybe do lots of mopping up after a
mm, yeah,
conversation that derails. I'm going to go back to what you were saying there about the emotional hijack
yeah.
as well, and just a lack of awareness or a lack of understanding about that can lead to some real botches in communication. And there's some good news here as well. And I think the good news is that it is actually possible. And I'm sure you and many listeners will be familiar with this principle of name it to tame it around difficult emotions. But
Mm,
if I'm sitting there, I get thrown a curveball, I've got a sense that the stakes have suddenly shot up. So my heart is racing, or my mouth has gone dry, or my palms have gone really clammy, and that actually, even with those physiological reactions, if we name, I am really starting to feel anxious now, or I'm feeling super nervous, like that in and of itself can just help reduce the volume a
mm,
bit. And other simple things really help. So I know for myself, when I go shaky in my chest when I get nervous. So I just get this awful shaking feeling inside. And I've learned that actually, if I just change my posture, uncross my legs, sit up a little straighter, take a deeper breath, and use my physicality to manage my emotionality, just that sometimes has helped me stay in the conversation rather than, and my younger self has burst into tears, yeah, and had to. I remember with one in one situation, and it wasn't actually in the training room, it was over dinner in the evening when somebody really went for me. And I didn't know all this. It was many years ago.
mm,
And I burst into tears.
mm.
And
Were
I
they giving
left.
feedback, or what was the situation?
Oh, they were being a bit mean.
Oh,
Yeah, and maybe without going too much into the story, but we'd done half a day, a co-facilitator and I, and we'd agreed that he would lead the afternoon of day one. I'd be more in observation mode, and I'd lead the morning of day two. So I hadn't done very much visibly on that afternoon. And what this person said over dinner, but it was the tone of voice as much as
mm,
what was said, was he said something like, well, what are you here for? Is it,
yeah.
it's two facilitators, but for the price of one, I hope. Like really quite, but with a nasty tone of voice, mean
Yeah.
look in his eyes.
Mm,
And this might be too much information, but yeah, I was also premenstrual and just in that really kind of wobbly place that
yeah.
sometimes
Anything can
comes.
set you off. I know I can absolutely relate to that, and I'm sure a lot of listeners can as well.
Yeah, and anyway, so I've learned a lot over the years, a lot
Mm,
through my own experience, a lot through coaching others, a lot through the writing process as
yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And small things can make such a big difference.
Yeah. I mean, the impression I get from something like that is what business did he have saying that? What was he trying to achieve? And especially doing it in that way. So, you know, when it comes to having those kinds of conversations, you always have to think about the intention. I think that ties in with the idea of preparation. Like, what is the intention behind this? What is it that I want to share, and why do I want to share it? What outcome am I expecting? So I'm thinking like that person didn't do any of this work, or they didn't really understand the impact that they were going to have on you by saying that, probably because they said it very in a mean way, exactly like you said. Like, what was the purpose of that? Just to be mean, I think.
Yeah, and the board was going through a very unsettled time.
Mm,
I think cost was actually quite, and you know, and
mm,
I suppose ultimately I'll never really know what their intention was. I think, unfortunately, sometimes people are mean because they're really frustrated. And I think there's a misguided notion
yeah,
that if I kind of vent that or dump that on somebody else, that's going to make me feel better. But of course, it doesn't
doesn't.
really
No,
work like that.
no, no, not at all. No. And in fact, sometimes it makes us feel worse because we reflect on what we've done, or we see the impact of what we've done. And it doesn't, it definitely doesn't make us feel better. And yeah, maybe if we don't intentionally want to hurt other people, I think, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's really interesting because situations like that happen every day at work. And for me, I think it's really important to understand with people, but maybe we can think about this from both the giving side and the receiving side. So maybe starting with the giving. So we talked about preparation, but what are those kind of high stakes conversations you think that people have? And here's another thing, why do we avoid them? Because I know I've been there. I've avoided those conversations. I know I need to have this conversation. I do not want to have this conversation. And we just kind of sweep it under the rug.
Yes. Well, I think classic challenging conversations would include things like telling somebody you've got to let them go,
Mm,
saying no, whether that's to a request for a salary increase or something else, advocating for oneself, so asking for the pay rise or the perk or the promotion, giving challenging feedback, particularly to a colleague who's more senior. That would be difficult for many people. So I think there are some very um, yeah, scenarios that are very common that
mm,
many, in my experience, many people would say, yep, that's certainly a difficult conversation. And then there can be ones that are maybe, I mean, somebody recently said to me that their difficult conversation was that they were going to have a chat with a team member who was using AI to write, it seemed like, all their emails,
mm.
and the emails were coming across as being very robotic.
Oh,
And that was the difficult conversation for that person. So
mm,
it can really vary person
yeah,
to person. And avoidance is so common. And I know I've avoided difficult conversations myself, but in my personal life and my professional life. And what the research tells us is about 70% of managers and leaders can really identify with that. I've come to call it the avoidance syndrome. And yeah, I think there's lots of fear underneath that avoidance. So we don't want to upset the other person. We don't want to damage a relationship. And common to this, I think, is actually a fear of difficult emotions.
mm,
And that's one of the key insights I took from the classic book, Difficult Conversations by Douglas Stone and colleagues at the Harvard Negotiation Project. They sort of say, strip everything back. And difficult conversations are difficult because there are difficult emotions in the room, the frustration, the disappointment, the jealousy, the anger, and so on. And I found that to be very accurate. So there's a fear, whether it's conscious or not, of what happens when the difficult emotions come out, whether they're our own or the other person. And then how do we handle the person bursting into tears or
mm,
having a meltdown or shouting and thumping their fist on the table. How do
Mm.
we handle that?
Yeah, yeah. I ran a webinar a few weeks ago or a month ago now at this stage, all about delivering effective feedback. And I asked participants about like what their struggles are with it. And every single person said that they soften the blow because they don't want to upset the other person. I think we're so concerned with not upsetting other people, but I love how you've brought it to the next level. It's not just about upsetting someone else, it's our own fear of either our emotions getting out of hand or the emotions that are in the room, the other person, and what's going to happen there. So maybe can we explore that in a little bit more detail? Like, how do we, if we have this fear and now we're bringing this fear to light, how do we actually address it?
Yes. Well, one of the things I found really helpful to understand here, and this is picking up on some psychology from years ago. So this is Karen Horney's model. I think she published in 1945, psychoanalyst, about these different reactive tendencies.
Mm,
So three of them that is really helpful to understand. So if I just briefly talk them through, because understanding the notion of your own reactivity and then other people's reactivity gives us a map. It gives us a way of understanding better what happens when these trigger points do occur in conversation, or as you were saying, in feedback conversations as well. So some of us go into a people pleasing mode and we
okay.
become
Mm,
quite compliant, and we say yes when we really want to say no, and we lose our voice. We silence ourselves sometimes. So that's the more compliant reactive tendency. Another one is, if you like, the very opposite of that. Some people get more defiant, they get more controlling. This is where you might see the fist banging on the table, the
mm,
raised voice, the blazing eyes, and, a real heightened sense of emotion. And then there's a third reactive tendency. And what Karen Horney found amongst children, so these develop early in our lives. There are ways of coping when we're kids. They're part of our survival strategy when we're not getting the attention that we need from the grown up. So they're a sort of call for help, really. But if the people pleasing doesn't work and the controlling doesn't work, then what children will do is try a third strategy. And this is the one of distancing. So this is the silent treatment, the cold shoulder, the lack of response. And I sometimes think this is the trickiest one of all, because in a way you don't have anything to work with, or not
mm.
very much to work with, and probably we've all been on the receiving end of the silent treatment sometimes, but the silence kind of is giving us a very loud message. But that's the other way in which people can be reactive rather than being responsive. And it for me, it's made a real difference to understand that.
Mm. I think it's great to have that framework. And to me, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking it sounds like a lot like attachment theory as well. Like I wonder, are the elements of it slightly related to attachment theory, like going silent or giving someone the silent treatment versus going into fawning and people pleasing mode versus getting really angry and reactive?
Yes, I think you could certainly make links between the people pleasing maybe happening more in people with a more anxious attachment style. The silent treatment, the distancing would chime very much with the avoidance. So, yes, I
Mm,
think you could definitely make links there. Yeah, and of
yeah.
course, all of that, it's so deeply wired in us, the attachment style, the reactive tendency, that it's a big call to consciousness as a leader, as a manager, to sort of see that in
Mm,
ourselves, to maybe see it in other people, see it for what it is,
mm,
and therefore cut across the the pattern that can be, if you're being reactive, I'm just going to get defensive and reactive as well.
yeah.
Whereas we might come in with from a more centered and grounding place and ask, what do you really need right now? Or what do we really need to talk about? Or I've noticed you're having a strong reaction to
Mm,
what I've just said. So let's just slow down here. So, those responses become more available to us if we can just be in our seat and be more present, even as I said earlier, the heart is beating strongly and the palms have got a bit clammy.
yeah. I love that. If I can just summarize what we talked about, the main reason that we avoid having these conversations, feedback or otherwise, there's lots of different situations where these are high stakes. And what's high stakes for one person might not be high stakes for another person. It really just depends on your level of awkwardness that, like, I really do not want to have this conversation. It's mainly driven by fear. And the fear at a subconscious or maybe sometimes at a conscious level is to do with difficult emotions. We all have reactive tendencies. And if I understand correctly, it's from both sides. So the person who you're giving, if the person who's on the receiving end, let's say, of the conversation, and a conversation with two people, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Um, it's not just them being reactive, it's us and having that sense of awareness of our own reactions as well. And then when something's happening in the room, actually naming it. I think that's really the key. So don't avoid those conversations, because you can break it down into a framework and there's three types of reactions. Probably people would favor the silent treatment and the people pleasing over the banging on the table and the controlling type of reaction, but they all are difficult in their own ways and they're not driving the relationship forward. But I love that we have a framework to think about it. If we're thinking from a practical point of view, and for anyone who's listening today, if they're avoiding a conversation or if they have a conversation coming up, what kind of things do you think they need to consider? So we have this kind of flow where we know what to expect in the room, we know why we're avoiding it, and we have a framework to think about. Well, there's three reactive tendencies. So the person is going to react in one of three ways. It's my job as a leader to actually have this conversation. So what do you think people need to consider when they're going into to have that conversation?
Well, a useful bit of prep can be, and this is more around mindset shift than skill set, and we can come
Mm,
on and talk about some practical skills as well, is to do, I call it a trade-off exercise. So you might just take 5 minutes for this, grab a piece of paper or your remarkable, whatever it is, and let's keep it really simple. You've got two options. You either have the conversation or you stay silent.
mm,
And for each of those two options, there are risks and there are benefits.
mm,
And you map that out, just a few bullet points in each of those four areas. And what often becomes apparent to people when they think it through in the round in that way is that they get to see, because we're often very fixated on the risks of having the conversation, but what we often fail to see are what the risks are of staying silent.
mm,
And when we have a good look at that, we might say things like, well, the status quo is just going to remain, or things might actually get worse. The situation might actually fester if I don't speak out. I might lose respect for myself if I keep on staying stuck in this situation. So, unlocking your own willingness, your own courage can be a big part of this. And that very simple exercise can, I've seen it happen many times over the years, just help people to go, okay, I'm still kind of dreading it,
Mm.
but I'm now seeing that actually, and I often think it ends up often being a few minutes of discomfort, sometimes if that.
Mm.
And those few minutes, it might even be a few moments of discomfort, can be so worth the potential benefit and upside. And it might be that nothing actually changes on a tangible level. Maybe you don't get the pay rise. Maybe you don't, you give the challenging feedback and your colleague is quite resistant and they don't change their behavior. But on an intangible level, you might come away from that conversation, with your self-esteem, your self-respect intact.
Mm.
And that is really valuable for us. So there's a mindset shift that
Yeah.
sometimes needs to take
Just
place.
knowing that you can do it. And like I had this conversation once, I can definitely have this conversation again. And, when I talk about things like imposter syndrome, and when I talk about moving forward, it's about taking courageous action. It's having the courage, and those small wins, like that little small win, means that the next time you go to have that conversation, you feel a little bit more confident. Or if it doesn't go well, maybe you learn from that experience and like, what do I need to do differently the next time? And Sarah, you mentioned about skill set as well. So is there anything else that you want to share on mindset or skill set?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking when you were speaking there, just back to stretch, because I
Yeah.
really like the point you were making there, that actually that learning, that experience, we can take forward with us
Mm.
into another challenging situation. It sort of puts some fiber in our being when
Yeah.
we are able to lean in, and that stays with us. So I just really wanted
Yeah.
to underline your point.
But I think, like, for me, it was building on that idea of self respect. So I might lose self respect if I don't speak up for myself, or if I don't have this conversation, if I avoid it. And I love how you described like building up that fiber. It's having these things are what makes us human, I think, is avoiding them and feeling really awkward and emotional about it. But what helps us grow is actually taking action anyway and doing it. And then we build our courage and we build our confidence as we have more of those conversations.
Yes, absolutely. And I think on the skill side, I think there is something, I'll just cover it briefly and then come
Mm.
on to other things as well. There is something about how you stay present, and whether you have a mindfulness practice or a little way that you get some stillness inside yourself, whatever you've got in your toolkit is really going to resource you well in this territory. And I think that is a skill and it is a capacity that we can cultivate: presence, groundedness. So there's that. I love, I'm currently doing a course myself with Meg Wheatley, the writer, Leadership and the New Science. And she really underlines this notion of taking your seat. That's her way of describing being present. And I think we super need to take our seat for these challenging conversations, feet flat on the ground and so on. I think it can be really helpful. And I'm sure many of your listeners will be familiar with active listening,
Mm.
just as you've done. And I've really appreciated it in our conversation where you've done the summarizing and, just sort of like, this is what we've covered so far before you've then given your next question. So that is a superb example right here, right now, of the
Thank you.
active
Mm.
listening. And of course, people will not shift if you're in a tight spot often until they feel they've been understood,
Mm.
heard, respected, and active listening is such a good tool. The summarizing, paraphrasing, reflecting back. So that's a key skill set. I think there's also something about authentic speaking and the language that we use. So I think it's really helpful to find your opening, what the very first thing you'll say will be. And you might even rehearse that out loud, literally get your mouth around the words. And you might also think, you might say to yourself, what is really at the heart of the matter here? So
Mm.
I'm going to open it up by saying this, and then there'll be some backwards and forwards. What's the thing I really need to communicate here?
Mm.
And to think through again how you are going to language that part of the conversation. And in my own mind, I think of that as authentic speaking. And I'm just going to signal because I think it's so good in the nonviolent communication
Mm.
body of work, Rosenberg's work. He's very, very good at making the distinction about when any of it, we go into more judgmental language, or the language is more neutral, or it's
Mm.
really own. So I'm shifting from you statements, you did the da 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 to I, and the impact on me, and just thinking through carefully how we express the key points is
Yeah.
really helpful.
I love that idea of getting to the heart of the matter, because I think that requires a little bit of preparation on our side. So there might be something that's annoying you, and you're like, okay, let's dig a bit deeper. Why is that annoying me? Why is that bothering me so much? And dig a layer deeper and a layer deeper and keep going. And fundamentally, what is it about? And maybe it's like, I feel disrespected because I asked you to do something and it wasn't completed on time, or whatever it might be that's going on for you. So like digging in to really understand that, and the ability to like when you said about sharing authentically, what I thought was, you're getting a message maybe from someone more senior, and having to communicate that in your own way without using their language. So finding a way to communicate that yourself as well. And I've been in that situation, and it was quite awkward because the feedback was coming from someone else, and I was the one who had to communicate it to the other person, which, well, we could argue that shouldn't have been the case, but it was the case in that situation. There was a couple of other things that occurred to me as you were talking as well, Sarah. And so again, some previous podcast episodes where we've talked about this, Carla Miller talked about using the cloak of authority. So she kind of made up this term, if you like, linking it back to Harry Potter and saying your job as a leader is to be authoritative and to have these conversations. And so if you're going into a room, you can still have these conversations, even if you feel awkward, even if you feel nervous. You can step into the room, you can put on your cloak of authority. And how she described it was, Carla, the person, is really nervous. Carla, the person, wants to be really liked. Carla, the leader, needs to have this conversation and is courageous, and and having this conversation. And there was another one as well, Kelly Ray Thompson. She talks about, I can feel this way and still do this thing. So just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean that you can't necessarily at the same time behave in a certain way or act in a certain way. I can feel really nervous and I can still speak up or advocate for myself. I can feel like I'm not prepared and still put myself forward for this promotion, whatever it might be. But it doesn't mean that we don't take action just because we feel a certain way.
Very good. I love both of those, like Carla as leader, Aoife as lead, Sarah as leader. Yeah, like, inside myself, I sometimes feel, young Sarah, little Sarah, and just acknowledge,
Mm.
the feeling of nervousness or that upset. But, there are many parts to us. There are many, and it's very interesting to have ways of pivoting
Mm.
internally so that you inhabit and then express your self-expression comes from, you know, big Carla or
Yeah.
Carla is leader or that's really powerful to
Mm,
be able to access that and to do it in the moment when the stakes are
exactly.
going up. Um,
This is it. Yeah, it's an in the moment thing, isn't it? It's and for me it hinges on this idea of awareness, which I think we touched on earlier, just being aware of the shifts and the changes, especially in your own body. What's happening? My palms are sweaty, my heart is beating really fast. Okay, how can we name that? How can we
yes.
move on past that? Sarah, you mentioned that there were a couple of other things that you wanted to talk about before we wrap things up.
Yeah, I was thinking also of the value in these tricky interactions of also asking questions,
Oh yeah.
not just asserting, giving opinions. And it's something I do often, but not actually necessarily just before a difficult conversation, before a conversation. And it might just be 30 seconds or a minute. And I just take a moment to tune in to that person, what's in my memory bank, what happened last time we interacted. And again, coming from the heart, coming from a place of genuine curiosity, what can I ask them? So it's not just about me or, and certainly in the context of a difficult conversation, I think it's good practice just to say, you know, what do I need to find out here? Because, and if I can just refer back to Rosenberg again for a
Mm,
moment in nonviolent communication, I think he's also very, very good at pointing to that often in tricky situations, there's unmet needs that are
mm,
really running the show. And so I loved when you said a few moments ago about really digging in, you know, what am I really annoyed about? What do I
mm.
really need here? And that question around the unmet need, whether it's framed or not like that, I think is really helpful to ask oneself, what do I actually need some acknowledgement here, or
Mm,
I really need an apology. And then also to remind oneself that the other person or the other people at the cot might also have unmet needs. And how might I be able to draw that out, whether it's through a question or some empathic response? So there's something about the asking questions.
yeah.
And final couple of quick thoughts. What do you say if it all starts to
Oh
derail?
God, yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Tell me
what
quickly.
Yeah, what it's whether it's I think we should press the pause button here
Mm,
and come back in 5 minutes, 10 minutes next when we've all had
yeah,
a chance just to gather ourselves. So there's something about what's the worst case scenario and
yeah.
what do you have up your sleeve
Mm.
for that?
It's really calling a spade, isn't it? Like this is not working right now. Let's address the elephant in the room. Let's I love that word. Let's press pause on this right now and we'll come back to it and then
Yeah.
insert timeline, you know.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there's also something about just thinking through the scenario where again you don't get what you've asked for or you're sensing you've done your prep, you've stayed
Mm,
present, you've spoken about the heart of the matter, and still you've not landed in the place you wanted to. What you might say at the end of the conversation that might, for example, just keep the door to dialogue open. So it might, can I pick this up with you again in a month's time?
mm,
Or, but just so you leave the conversation not feeling so stuck. And I think that is also worth thinking through offline, where hopefully your nervous system is more settled.
yeah.
You can really think it through.
Yeah. I think that's such a nice way to put it, because if you don't get what you ask for, you kind of maybe see it quite binary, like it's either a success or a failure. But if you leave the door open and you think, okay, so when can we revisit this? I would like to talk about this again. And I wish I had that language when I was in corporate situations, and advocating for myself and asking for what I wanted, and seeing it very much in those like black and white kind of terms, rather than thinking, okay, when can we look at this again? And again, going into the prep and learning from that first experience, how do I do things better the next time? And then in brackets slightly, how do I get what I want at work, basically? Yeah, brilliant. I've loved this conversation, Sarah. Really, really practical, really insightful as well. Really loved the back and forth of it. Sarah, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast: what does being happier at work mean to you?
It means, I think it means being real, as in I can show up as who I am, and I can feel that I'm in real relationship with other people. So we're talking about what really matters. We are moving forward together. If there are things clogging the air, we can find our way through that. We're not avoiding it, we're not bypassing it. And what all of that then means is that we're all kind of growing and evolving and moving forward in a very real way. That's
Brilliant. Love it. And if people want to find out more about you, if they want to reach out to connect, what is the best way they can do that?
LinkedIn is probably the simplest way. So you'll find me on LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn. I have a website that's my own name, but probably LinkedIn's the simplest.
Brilliant. And tell us about your books as well.
Oh, thank you. So the latest one is called Now We're Talking, How to Discuss What Really Matters, very much written for business leaders, managers and organizations. The one before that, Powered by Purpose, energize your people to do great work. So yeah, how you make day-to-day work meaningful. That's got a foreword by Paul Polman, who was CEO of Unilever
Wow.
for years. And then the first one, which is more self-help, more about our personal lives, family lives, is called How to Have Meaningful Conversations.
Brilliant. Love it. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this conversation today, and looking forward to continuing the conversation as well. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Aoife. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.